It's the danger of pride is the name of our lesson. And it's in the book of Daniel. It says that pride leads to sacrilege, pride exposed, pride opposed by God, and our central truth is humility is essential virtue of Christian character. And in our introduction, it says that God is displeased when people profane holy things. For example, Esau profaned his birthright by selling it for a bowl of soup, and he suffered the consequences. Moses became angry and profaned the Lord by striking a rock when God told him to speak to the rock. Moses was a great man, but God judged him for his sin. And that's the reason that he did not go into the land of Canaan, because that he disobeyed God before the people and did not sanctify him like that. This week's lesson, we read that Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, profaned the vessels that had been stolen from God's temple in Jerusalem. He used these vessels in a drunken party as he praised his pagan idols. Belshazzar perished just at the time he was deserting and profaning the sacred vessels. God's judgment of Belshazzar is a warning to people everywhere, including Christians, that the sacred things of God must be honored. Now, it's the story of Daniel and Belshazzar, and this is going to be the fall of the great Babylon Empire. And there's several kings that we're talking about. Of course, there's been kings past this, but the last kings, and it was Nabopolassar. He was the king from 625 to 606. Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king to 606 to 562. Of course, this is BC, so you're always counting backwards. Evil Merodach, and that's quite a name, isn't it? 562, 559 BC. Nebuchadnezzar, 559 to 555 BC. Landesh Merodach, 555, 9 months. And these people, they had that many kings between today's lesson and Nebuchadnezzar. And they didn't last very long. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC. But Nebuchadnezzar's son and grandson were both murdered. And then it came down to Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus. And Belshazzar then turned into the king, and he was a co-ruler. But anyway, these kings that followed Nebuchadnezzar, they wound up dead for some reason, one or another. And there was murder. And then when Nabonidus got down, he probably was wondering about maybe he should try to be king or not. But anyway, he did not really care for the kingdom. He actually, after he became crowned, he went up into the country and stayed there for 10 years. And he was studying religion. But then Belshazzar, his son, was the co-ruler for that time. And as co-ruler, he did all the ruling in Jerusalem while his father had just passed off the scene. and went somewhere else. But he was really the king, but he just let his son do that as a co-ruler. Now, the Babylon Empire, this is the way it was in Nebuchadnezzar's day. They, and you see the Strait of Hormuz on the lower right-hand corner of your map. You hear about that a lot of times these days, don't it? Straits of Hormuz, where 20% of the oil, I think, comes out of the world, or did at one time, till recently. But then you go up to Babylon, and the Euphrates River runs straight through the city. And then the Medes and the Persians, which we'll get to here in a few minutes, they were on the right side of your screen, they was to the east of Babylon. But Babylon, it was the greatest city in the world. It was a very old city. It was probably where idolatry, among other places, it was a big thing. And in the Revelations, in the 18th chapter, I think, 17th or 18th chapter, it talks about the fall of Babylon. Because when you mention Babylon, you're talking about a wicked city. And the Nebuchadnezzar's wife, I guess it was, he did a lot for the city. And they had the great hanging gardens of Babylon. And his wife, or one of his wives, she missed her home territory and the home climate and the trees and everything that was at her house. So in order for him to make his wife happy and not have her to be so homesick, he just made it a garden city. And it was beautiful. And it, like it was mentioned last week, it was the greatest city in the world. And they had been, the Medes and Persians were outside of the city at this time while we're talking about this. And Belshazzar, he was kind of a proud man, evidently. And he was so secure in being in the walls of his city and his army that when the Medes and Persians came, he just ignored it. He didn't even give it a clue. I mean, and how did he answer? He said, let's have a party, right? So they had this big drunken party, and he had 1,000 of his lords. And it was a great hall, and he also had his princes, his wives, his concubines, and a host of other people there. So the place was probably packed. And they was going on a drunken feast and party and celebration. And the vessels, you remember Nebuchadnezzar when he conquered Jerusalem, and when they brought them out the last time, that he brought out all the vessels of the gold and silver that was in the temple. And this was used by, these were thousands of years old, these vessels. They were solid gold and solid silver. And that was what Aaron and the priests used, and the Levites. And they were sacred vessels. And they was used only in the worship of God. But then Nebuchadnezzar took it and he put it in his private temple. And he never used them. But Belshazzar, he had a good idea. You know, he was having a good time. It was a drunken party. And he said, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken. Now, was that a good idea?
Well, from a world point of view, it might have been.
Yeah, he was just saying, well, we've conquered everything else, and we've conquered these Jews, and they have all this gold and silver, and their God didn't protect them, and you know, let's just bring that in here and worship our gods. But they drank wine, praised the gods of gold, of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and stone. These idols, they had no life in them. They had eyes but couldn't see, ears but they couldn't hear, had a mouth but they couldn't speak. They couldn't move around. If they went anywhere, somebody has to carry them. But yet people put their trust in these gods and just used it as a symbol, you know. But I think it was like 13 gods that were listed in the Babylonians. Marduk, I think, was the main one, but they would have gods of the weather, gods of war, gods of peace, gods of fertility, gods of everything. And they had a god that they would worship there. And, you know, like people in idolatry, they'll usually worship the most ferocious or the worst ones because they want to get on their good side. And
through
yes.
this AI now, the images that man has created, they speak and they hear. That's what's going on in Europe already. You know, using those and tying it into religion is unfortunate, but it's happening.
That's a wonder about that. You know, it's slipping in, you know, and most of us are probably using AI, whether we know it or not. You know, it's just AI generated, and I tested it there a few months ago. I asked a Bible question, and it answered me. And then the next day or two, I asked the same question again, and I got a totally different answer. And then the AI said that, I asked him, well, why did you answer me different? And then I argued with him a little bit more, and then he just said that, or AI asked him a couple more questions, and then he said, this session is over. We're still learning. So, you know, that's the kind of brains you get.
Yeah.
But they can get you you can get the verses of the Bible brought up pretty quick. I mean, if you go to AI, they'll flash it right up instantly. And the others, but you know, it's if you get dependent upon it, you know, it's going to lead you anywhere.
Well, for me, the A is the giveaway. It's not real intelligence, it's artificial intelligence.
Right.
If it's artificial, then it can't be good.
And they probably will get to know you and, you know, what you think or what you want or what you like, you know, because they got it from everywhere.
That's why they put all these data centers in, so they can
Note that
learn.
verses are, Daniel tell him later, he knew better.
Yeah.
He wasn't without knowledge about what was going on with these instruments of the temple.
Right.
You know, he had the intelligence to know that this was not really a good idea. But in his drunkenness and pride,
you say, Woody?
All trying to promote all these data centers, you know,
Right.
building around, not just in Virginia, a lot of places, you know, to amplify the AI push, you know, or whatever agenda, and, you know, control people's lives even more.
Right. Yeah, these data centers, they only use about 40 people, only create about 40 jobs, 40 or 50 jobs. They run the whole shebang. And then state gives them tax credits and all that, and plus all the water issues. They have to have so much water to cool all that stuff that it's just, people might have a job drinking, you know.
Electricity too, you know.
Right, a lot of electricity.
I think we ought to call them what they really are.
Right,
They're not data centers, they're surveillance centers.
right, right. And Virginia's got several of them. But when they have a party, of course, what they're going to have? Music and dancing. So they probably had that. They probably was drunken and they was worshiping their gods. And these idols, a lot of it, they have sacrifices. A lot of them is you have priests and priestess that worship the idols, and they're all into that. So it was just a big levity. And when they brought back the vessels, you know, they probably brought back all the gold vessels, and there was probably some that were pretty big. So they had them up, and they were drinking wine out of that, and they were eating and just being totally merry, having a good time, even though the Medes and Persians was just right in the area. And 5:5 it says, in the same hour came forth the fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. And don't you think that Belshazzar, at that time, he become cold sober.
Yeah.
He wasn't drunk anymore. And it went through the big hallway where all the festivities were going on. And I think the whole building and all the attendants just stopped and saw what was going on. And wasn't that sort of eerie, you know, if you was in that situation, that you see this hand just come out. Yeah. And it just started writing a language you couldn't understand. And a hand that wasn't connected to anything. And he really hit him hard. But then he knew what to do. When he had a problem, he just called his astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and he would ask them what to do. And he was, you know, dealing with advice from the devil, usually most of the time. Yeah. And none of them knew what to do. He said, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. But the king's countenance changed. His thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosened. His knees smote once against the other, just shaking. And he cried and told them to bring all these soothsayers and the wise men of Babylon. But they came, and what happened? Nothing. Nobody could read it. You know, it looks like if they valued their head, they would make up something. I mean, they routinely counseled Belshazzar on what to do, and he had total faith in him. He didn't have much faith in Daniel, I don't think, because he was out of the picture most of the time. But they.
These wise men of Babylon, being the ruling kingdom of the earth,
Right?
they would have known all the languages of all the provinces.
Right?
He would have known all the foreign languages available. He would have had these personnel that would know languages. This was not an earthly language.
Nobody, yes, somebody there should have known it. Yeah. Or even have a hint or guess, but nobody knew what was going on. But then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. And then the queen come. Always God save the queen, right? But she was not Belshazzar's wife. She was, they think, the wife of evil Merodach. You know, that those people that were between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, that she was probably the queen. She was definitely older than Belshazzar because she knew what to do. And she didn't send word. She just came. She heard what was going on in the banquet hall, and she went over and she told Belshazzar. He said, there is a man that will, fear not, be not dismayed. There's a man. But of course she said, God save the king first. But then he said, there's a man who, your fathers, Nebuchadnezzar, he told him of dreams and of visions and of things that comes to pass. He had the Spirit of God within him, and he knew what to do in every situation. And she says, send for him. And so the queen mother, and she said, the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, is found in him. And he said, his Nebuchadnezzar even made him the master of the astrologers and the magicians and the Chaldeans and the soothsayers. All of those were put under the direction of Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar was in office. But he didn't. Belshazzar, I think he knew of it, but he didn't use it because he probably wasn't comfortable around him. For one thing, because he knew it was the real God. But they sent for Daniel. And Daniel called, and he will show you the interpretation, it says. O thou King, the Most High, God gave Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And you remember Daniel, he was the one that when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream about the huge statue with the golden head and the silver arms and then the brass and iron, and that was representing all the kingdoms that was going to come from Babylon. And he told him about that. But Nebuchadnezzar, it said that he was a proud man. He after that dream, I think it was about a year after Daniel told him what was going to happen, that Nebuchadnezzar, he walked out in Babylon, and he said, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built?" He took all the glory, and he took all the credit. He said, "I built it." And it said, then the watcher, this sounds like something that would come out of the book of Enoch. The watcher, he cried out against him, and God gave him the heart of a beast. He went plumb crazy. He didn't know what he was doing. And the king, he ate straw like an ox. He probably crawled around on all fours, thinking he was an animal. And, wouldn't that be something to see? And then his hair became like eagle's feathers. And his nails became like eagle's claws. And for 7 years, he was out there with the wild asses and the other animals. And he didn't have a clue of what he was doing. You could go out and speak to him, and he probably would move like a cow. Because he probably thought he was a cow, But when he faced and overturned, one day, after 7 years, his mind came back to him. Then he looked up to God, and he recognized where he had been and what he was doing. And he had the whole credit. But now, it says 3 times in Daniel, book of Daniel. It says, till he knew what the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. Who sets up men and sets down men? God, the Most High. And God rules in the kingdom of men, and he appoints over it whomsoever he will. Sometimes he would use an evil king to come in, and he did it a lot of times with Israel. When Israel backslid on God, there would be other people that would come in that would take control over them. And then they finally would call out to God and get a judge to come. And thou, he was talking to Belshazzar, Daniel was. He said, and thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thy heart, though thou knewest of all this. He knew that happened to Nebuchadnezzar, but he didn't think it would happen to him. So he got on the proud man, and one thing about pride, or arrogance, it seems like everybody else knows who's arrogant except the person who is, right? Yeah. The proud person. Yeah. And, and you can get to where you can be proud of your humility, right? Yeah, I'm really humble. Yeah. But anyway, but pride shows up. And it said it also makes everybody sick, besides the one who's got it. Right? But as this was writing that was written tekos upharsin. And that means, means God has numbered your kingdom. You know, it did it twice. And he done closed out his account. He no longer was king. And that God sent him the message on the wall that he had numbered it. It was over. And he's finished. He's put your number, he's just checked you out. You ruled here to here. And he said, thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting.
Yeah.
And God has a different way of judging nations than he does, I think, just people. But a nation is sort of like lead poison. If you eat a little lead, you know, it gets in your body. What happens to it? Your body can't process it. It never leaves your body. It stays in your body. And then if you get a little more in, you know, it does the same thing. And you could keep going, and, you know, you could die from lead poisoning.
Yeah.
But there's no cure. But that's the same way with nations. He goes from, it's not just one generation. It might be 2, 3, 4, 5 generations that he will suffer a certain nation. And then they can turn around and cancel all that out and be blessed of God. But if they don't, sometimes it's going to just lead to destruction. I know we're going to be judged in Matthew 25, the judgment of nations. And Jesus is going to judge who goes in the great millennial reign. But you know, nations, he don't wait till you get to heaven to judge them. He judges them on earth. He judges them now. And every time when his thing is up to judge a nation, he can do it, but it'll be in this life, and it will be before the great judgment of God. But the balance, and that's the way they always used to, where they was buying goods, they would balance it out and put the weights on the other side. But you know, then you have the scale of justice, and you have the woman that's got a mask over her eyes, because justice is blind. It just goes by the facts, supposedly. Tico, thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And that probably stuck with Belshazzar then, you know, because the Medes and the Persians were outside his gate. But he didn't pay any attention. He just had a drunken party. But then Daniel told him what he needed to know. So he did honor his word. He gave Daniel a coat of purple. It says scarlet in the back. And he gave him the third ruler of the kingdom. So the rulers was at that time Nabopolassar, whatever. That was Belshazzar's father. He was, I think Cyrus caught him outside the walls. And then Belshazzar was the second one. And who was the third? Daniel. He put that golden chain around him, and he said, you're the third ruler. After me, It's you. Praise the Lord. So what happened next?
Brother Gene,
Yes.
the Euphrates River ran diagonally through Babylon,
Mhm.
and there were gates, brass gates across the river. And inside the city, there was 100 gates, brass leaved, on both sides of the river. And the gates were open. Jeremiah prophesied exactly what would happen.
Mhm.
So the Medes and the Persians, they dammed up the river and diverted it. And then their armies were able to walk right under the gates that went across the river and right into the city. There was no defense. They
Amen.
left everything open.
Yeah, they just, I think it was Cyrus who, upstream from the Euphrates River, they took that river and their men and they put it into an old dry riverbed, didn't they? And this was prophesied in Jeremiah, and it also was prophesied in Isaiah the 44th chapter about that this would happen. They called Cyrus by name way before he was ever born. And so this was just bringing out the prophecy of God. And they came in right in the middle of the night. And Darius, the medium, he took the kingdom. I think Cyrus was this group that was diverting the water. And that night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius did it.
Daniel miraculously escaped that.
Yes.
The Lord moved upon him right there too.
Right. And when Darius got in there, after he killed Belshazzar, he knew that Daniel was the third ruler of the kingdom. And this was the man he was going to speak to. And everybody else, there was nobody fighting. Of course, it was at night. But those that were at the party, they probably knew. But nobody lifted up a hand against anybody. And he pretty much took the city like that. And he was dealing with Daniel as the third ruler of the kingdom.
From what I've read, Cyrus got the idea of going into the city by studying the writings of Jeremiah. And so he had great regard for the Hebrews.
Yes,
So he knew about Daniel,
right,
and that protected Daniel.
right. And that was prophesied in Isaiah and Jeremiah. And he probably knew that. But it said that, and it called Cyrus by name, said that he would do that. So that's what made the great kingdom of Babylon fall. And he was the third ruler in the kingdom. And he was only 62 years old. He was retirement age when he took that. Of course, kings never do that anyway. But anyway, it talked about pride. And Billy Graham said that pride flees when comparing ourselves to God instead of to other people. But it says that he that commendeth himself and compares himself with others is not wise or unwise, But it talks about pride, and when pride comes, then comes the fall. And
Proud people are very easily offended. And this is the generation
Proverb says, without pride, what is it? Only by pride cometh contention. So if people that so easily offended, they're probably proud. And smarter than you to begin with. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, anybody else got anything? But that's when the great kingdom fell. And it was, and Babylon, you know, I think it's going to be built again. What do you think, Richard?
Yes.
Yes. I think, I forget the man's name, but he was a Pentecostal. He wrote a book about Babylon, and he read the Bible through 100 times. But he said he and most Bible scholars were confident that Babylon is going to be rebuilt. And you know where it's at over there now, you know, and everything that's going on, and all these countries going this and that way and the other, you know. And it probably will be in the same place, because it's going to have to fall in Revelation 17 chapter. And it says that it's going to have a lot of trade and everything, and crafts to prosper, and in 1 hour it's going to fall, just like it did the first time. But anyway, God bless y'all.